Hello everyone. I may have made, well in fact I know I've made videos about this before, but they're a few years back and I think the issue is still relevant. I tend to, let's say, recycle certain themes if they are still relevant. In this video I'm going to be talking a bit about something we have in the UK called the Jeremy Kyle Show. It's very famous, unfortunately. And basically, what the show involves is it's a talk show. It involves a presenter, the namesake of the show, Jeremy Kyle, inviting guests on, so-called guests, to air their differences. These are people with serious social problems. Quite often, they're petty criminals, drug users. They're often unemployed. They usually have relationship problems of one sort or another. Sometimes it's abusive relationships, sometimes it's people cheating on each other, all sorts of outlandish storylines. Basically, to my American viewers, think the British Jerry Springer, but worse. I say worse because I do believe a lot of Jerry Springer stuff is set up. Maybe a better comparison would be the British Steve Wilkos. Well, actually, my American viewers will know Jeremy Kyle because he's been transported over there. His shows have been broadcast over there. Anyway, straight to the point. I have nothing but deep contempt for this show and the man who presents it. And I want to weigh out a few of the reasons why. Firstly is, I'll try and break this down into different points. Firstly is the supposed intention of the show. The show supposedly is meant to help people to reconcile their differences, and that's what its supporters claim. They claim these are people who need help, or they need someone to tell them, to stand up to them, to tell them where they're wrong. Now, I don't dispute that some of the guests are pretty despicable individuals. He brings on guys who beat up their girlfriends, he brings on gang members, he brings on druggies, some pretty despicable lowlifes, quite frankly, are among his guests. And I can to some extent understand why people would think that these people need to be spoken to the way Kyle speaks to them. I'm no namby-pamby when it comes to crime. What I mean by that is I am not attacking this show as a liberal sort of in an ivory tower that doesn't know the real world. In fact, it's precisely because I do know the real world that I feel the need to attack the show. What I resent is it's marketed as entertainment. This is people's private lives being plastered onto national television as entertainment. Now, what I would argue is if Kyle really wanted to help these people, there would surely be better methods to do it than to turn their emotional turmoil into entertainment. That's a very important point. The show is marketed as that, and the sort of headlines are clearly designed. They're tabloid-esque headlines designed to grab people's attention. Now, Kyle always, before the guests come on, he always says, "Oh, we're not here to judge." But then, almost in the same breath, he deliberately stirs up his crowd, his studio audience, who, by the way, I have a pretty low opinion of. He stirs them up into booing or jeering or supporting the person that comes out. What Kyle does is he plays games with people's emotions. And I just think there's a massive amount of hypocrisy about this show. For example, he often brings on welfare claimants and vilifies them. He'll pick out the ones who do abuse the system and who have a very bad attitude to it. And what he will do is he will present them as representing all the unemployed in Britain. Kyle makes no attempt whatsoever to say you abuse the system, but there's many other claimants who don't. He doesn't attempt to do that. Kyle knows the truth, but he's a dangerous demagogue, and what he's doing is stirring up distortion about the overall picture. So in other words, he's inviting the extreme cases onto his show and trying to present that as the whole situation. That, in my opinion, is dangerous, because it fuels ignorance, it fuels hate against the unemployed, and it fuels hate against disabled Britons who really do have legitimate reasons to claim. This man is a dangerous demagogue. Kyle always defends himself and says, "Oh, I'm only telling the truth." The problem is, he's not. He's distorting the truth. He's cherry-picking the worst cases and he's ignoring the rest. That isn't telling the truth, that is distorting the overall picture. That's what he's doing, and it's dangerous. The other thing that makes me sick about this show is the factor of bringing in people's emotional relationship turmoils. Now, I know that people may get into a situation where they cannot reconcile things among themselves, but in that case they need a professional marriage counsellor, or they need to separate. But to go on to national television and have their personal lives splattered all over the place is just, it makes my stomach turn. Now, people say no one's forcing them to go on, they go on of their own free will. That may be true, but you have to realise these are often vulnerable people. They are often, it's pretty clear they're being exploited by Kyle. And he bribes them, that's a fact that's hugely overlooked. People are paid money to appear on his show. Do you really think anyone would go on otherwise? So Kyle, for example, attacks the unemployed for taking money off the state, and yet he gives them money to appear on his show, which is a lot more than Job Seekers Allowance, which is a very hypocritical position to take. So he's bringing on welfare cheats, those who abuse the system, and then he's giving them money to appear on the show. And then the idiots that form his studio audience think he's doing some sort of favour. They don't realise the absolute hypocrisy of this. But anyway, back to the relationship issue. I always quote an episode in which Kyle brought on a man under the guise that he was going to reconcile with his ex-wife. So what does Kyle do? He then brings out this woman's new lover, who turns out to be the man's tenant. The man's the landlord, and it turns out to be his very own tenant. So national television, he has lied to this man. He's told him the purpose to go on the show is to be reconciled with his wife, and then he brings out her new lover to be flaunted. Now, I don't know if he knew that that was going to happen. By his body language, it's not clear that he did. Well, what happened was he went and headbutted the other guy. Kyle then gets into his usual holier-than-thou crap and judges the man. But that whole headbutting incident, by the way, the man ended up sentenced in Manchester Crown Court for common assault. But I think most guys would understand that reaction. It's absolutely cruel, it's vile, and it's disgusting to play with someone's emotions like that. To sort of have someone humiliated in such a way on national television, I think it's disgusting. I think it's thoroughly disgusting. And for Kyle to have set up that situation as he did is just repugnant. And there's a lot of videos floating around. If you have any sense of decency, flag those videos, bring them down, because that man, it's grossly unfair to have someone's emotional turmoil plastered all over cyberspace like that. If anyone, the judge at the time said, if I had my way, the producer and the entire staff of this show would be in court too, and I thoroughly agree. He called it human bear baiting at the time, and that's exactly what it is. Because that's what Kyle does. He brings people onto his show and he sets up a situation to deliberately stir up emotions. And then whilst he's laying into his guests and playing holier than thou, he hides behind his security guards. Jeremy Kyle is a card. He is a gutless card. He can give but he can't take, and that is what is absolutely despicable about this little man. And this brings me on to the next point. It's the character of Kyle himself. Kyle always likes to make out that he's a great role model citizen. There's been episodes where he's laid into what he perceives as lousy fathers and says, "Oh, I'm a great father. I would have travelled the entire length of the nation to be with my children, etc. He comes out with these holier-than-thou statements. But if you look into Jeremy Kyle's own background, he had a long-standing gambling problem. He had a very dodgy marriage, which fell apart, by the way. He's been accused of being an adulterer, a womanizer. Jeremy Kyle is no role model citizen. And what makes me sick is he acts like a choir boy. He acts like he is above reproach. And Kyle himself, I never see him pointing out his own faults. You know, maybe he would be in a position to help these people, maybe, if he said, look, I made the same mistakes, I'm not perfect, I done this, I done that. But no, he plays God with his guests, and I think that's disgusting. Now, I'm not perfect either, but I don't run a talk show where I lay into people and pretend to be holier than them. Or if I do think I'm better than anyone, at least I'm not making a talk show and promoting the fact. Look, there's something very sick about this show. There's something very, very twisted about how it is, how the approach that is taken. And I think it's very dangerous. What Kyle is doing is preying on the most vulnerable people in this country. And he is turning their suffering into entertainment. Now, no doubt supporters will turn around and say, oh, well, look at all the people he has helped to reconcile. As far as I'm concerned, that doesn't matter, because those people, like I say, a marriage counsellor or a professional psychiatrist or professional people can actually do that anyway. Kyle's not a professional. He's a failed journalist. I believe his background, he worked for some radio show in Birmingham. He's never been a professional psychologist, ever. And most professional psychologists who have any self-respect would have nothing to do with this creep. Basically, Kyle is an egomaniac, a demagogue, and he's a much bigger parasite than any welfare cheat. He's a parasite because he preys on people who are desperate. These are people who really need help. They need psychological help, or in the case of the criminal elements who come onto the show, they need to be sentenced. They need to be brought before a court of law. I don't want to see wife beaters paraded around TV. What Kyle's doing is giving them their 15 minutes of fame. And in some cases it can make the situation worse, because he stirs up their temper. What's going to happen? They're going to go home and beat up the wife. So it's just a very disgusting show. And no doubt the people who enjoy the Jeremy Kyle show, and that brings me on to the final point, the very smug studio audience and the people who watch the show really believe they're much better than the guests. Now, it may be that they're not drug dealers, they're not welfare cheats, and they're not cheating on their partner. That may be so. What they are doing is they are taking some sort of very cheap titillation from enjoying watching other people's emotional turmoil. And that to me makes them pretty despicable. It's a despicable way to be entertained, and it is really no different from throwing mud at someone in the pillory in the 18th century. Is this really how far we have come as a society in the year 2014, that this sort of trash passes off as entertainment? Personally, I would love to see it taken off air. And to those who say, oh, what about free speech? This has nothing to do with free speech. This is an action. It's nothing to do with speech. This isn't Jeremy Kyle's opinions where he's just sharing on some radio show. This is actually an action. This is him exploiting people on national television. I think Kyle's a disgusting little man. I think he's a bully. He pretends that he's holier than thou. He berates. This is a case of Satan rebuking sin. He attacks bullies, but then he bullies people himself, because he berates people who are not in a position to defend themselves. Now, I'm not condoning some of the things that his guests do, but I don't think they're any worse than Kyle himself. In fact, I think Kyle is a lot worse. Kyle is the biggest parasite in Britain, because he's made millions through his books, through his show, of exploiting people. And I really, really hope someone stands up to this man. I wish one day one of his guests would turn around and smack him. I really do. I want to see Jeremy Kyle face some serious karma, because what he is doing is just disgusting. And if you support Kyle, if you really think you're much better than the guests, consider how you're spending your time. You're being entertained by other people suffering, and that makes you pretty despicable in my book. So, in conclusion, it's a sick show run by a creep and a parasite called Jeremy Kyle. It's just disgusting. Rant over.